Okay, so welcome everyone. Again, my name is Sarah Jellenc. I'm from the Information Lab UK, and this webinar is going to be on bite-sized Alteryx formula tips and tricks. So it is targeted towards beginners, so I'll be going pretty slowly, over-explaining everything just to make sure, especially since this is virtual training, that everyone can follow along with what I'm doing. Please just pop any questions you've got into the chat. My colleague Sophie will be there monitoring the chat, and also I'll pause in between sections to take questions as well. Okay. So the agenda for this webinar, it will probably be 40 minutes or so. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about the formula tool, just giving an overview of how to configure it and how it works. Then I'll go over some of the most useful string formulas, DateTime formulas, and conditional formulas. So first off, just a quick overview of the formula tool. So this is a screenshot of the formula tool's configuration pane. And the first thing we want to look at is this drop-down that says select column. So that is where you will select a field to update, or you'll create a new field. This white space here is called the expression editor. That is where you're going to type your formula. So if you know which formula or function you want to use, you can just start typing it there in the expression editor. It will do kind of an auto suggestion as you type things, so that you can just select what you want without having to type it all out manually. If you are not sure which function you want to use, or you just want to see a list of the available functions, you can click this little FX icon there on the left, and that will give you a list of all the possible functions you could use in Alteryx. That next icon down will give you a list of the variables. So that's all the fields you're working with, as well as the parameters of the formulas themselves. And if you write a custom formula that you know you're going to want to use again, maybe it's a particularly long or complex formula, you can save it with the little floppy disk icon. And once you've saved it, you can access it. With this formula, that will just display the data type of that existing field for reference. It won't let you change it there. But if you're creating a new field with this formula, that's where you can specify what data type you want your output to be. A preview will display of the first record once your formula is applied. So that's a nice way to check whether it's doing what you intend before you run your workflow. So we'll come back to this in just a minute once we get into Alteryx. But for now, we're just going to get right on into the string formulas. So a couple of my favorites are left and right. And left just returns the first however many characters you specify of a particular string. So there in the example, we've asked it to give us the left 3 of that series of numbers. And so it gives us the left 3, 926 in this case. Right does the same thing, just on the right. So there in that example, if we want the 3 digits on the right of that string, we get 688. So let's look at these two in Alteryx. Here we go. Focus on this first example here. And I've got a data set. Ooh, I need to run it. I've got just a tiny data set here of customer names and order numbers. So if we look at the order numbers, let's say that, I'll zoom for you. Oops. Oh, excuse me, let me open my zooming app here. I'm sure you'll appreciate it momentarily when my text isn't so tiny. There we go. So if we look at these order numbers in this little fake data set I've got here, we can imagine that the first two characters in that order number indicate the country in which the order was placed. So let's say we want to pull out those first two characters into a new column and call that country code. What we can do is grab a formula tool. That'll be up there in your preparation pane. Or if you're not sure where to find a tool, you can always type it into the search bar there in the top right. So I'll just grab that formula tool and attach it to my input. And here we can see we've got the formula tools configuration pane. So I want to again pull out the first two characters of that order number and put them in a new column called country code. So here on this drop down, where it says select column, I'm going to choose add column because I want to create a new one. And I will call this country code. So you just type the name of your new column straight into that box. And then I'll click here into the expression editor. And I'll start typing the left function. You can see as I type, it kind of auto-suggests the possibilities based on what I've typed so far. So you can either just click on the one that you want to use or hit enter if it's the first one. And I'm going to replace that string parameter with the field I want to pull from. So in this case, order number. Again, it kind of auto-suggests that field for me. And I'm going to replace this length parameter with 2 because I want to pull out the left 2 characters. And you can see there in my data preview window, it's showing me what my first record will look like once this formula is applied. And it's going to pull out just that CA from that first order number. So I'm just going to grab a browse tool to make it easy to see my output. And I'll run that. And then if we look at our results window here, we can see I've got this new column called country code, and it's just pulled the first 2 characters from the order number and put them in their own column. So let's say that let's imagine rather, that the last 4 numbers in that order number actually denote the product code. And maybe we want these in their own column as well. What we can do, I'm just going to click back onto my formula tool. And there are 2 ways to do multiple formulas. So you could put in another formula tool, or in our original formula tool, we can click this little plus icon to add a second function in this same tool. So I'll just click that little plus. And again, on this drop down where it says select column, I want to add a new column. And I'll call this product code. And this time, if we look down at our order numbers again, I'm pretending that the last 4 characters of that order number are the product code. So I'm going to pull out this write function. Again, replace string with the field I'm working with, so order number. And the length, in this case, I want to get the right 4 characters. And there you can see again in my little preview box, it's showing me what that first row is going to look like once this formula is applied. So again, I'll run that. Click on my browse tool to check my results. Now we can see we've pulled out the right 4 characters into its own column and called it product code. Okay. So a few more useful string formulas. You can also change the case of an entire field at once. So you could convert an entire string field to lowercase, to uppercase, or to title case. And this is especially useful for joins, because joins are case sensitive in Alteryx. So if you had a field of all lowercase customer names and you wanted to join it onto a field with title case customer names, for example, you need to make sure that both of those fields were the same case before you could successfully join them. So we'll look at an example in Alteryx again. Oops. Let me just bring this to the front so we can read what we're doing. Okay. So again, we've just got this customer orders. It's the same little data set we were working with before. At the moment, all of our customer names, you can see here, are in title case. So let's say we wanted to make all of these lowercase. Again, I'll grab a formula tool, little blue beaker. And over in the configuration pane on the left, I'm gonna, again, on this little drop down, I'm gonna add a new column just so it's easy to compare against our original. Oops. So I'll add a column. I'll just call this lowercase name. Click into the expression editor, and I'll just start typing my lowercase function. There it appears for me. I'll hit enter. I'll replace that string parameter with a customer name field. And again, you can see this data preview. It's showing what my first record will look like once this formula is applied, and it will all be lowercase, as you can see. And while we're here, I'll just go ahead and add another formula within this same tool by clicking on this little plus. And again, in my select column dropdown, I'm going to add a new one. And I'll call this uppercase name. So you don't have to run the formula tool in between adding additional formulas if you don't want to. Typing my uppercase function. And again, replace string with my customer name field. And again, there in my preview, you can see it's going to give me back John Beer as my first record, all capitalized. So I'll just run that. And I'll actually grab a browse tool again just to make it easier to see our results. If we check our results pane here, we can see we've got our original customer name field here on the left. And we've also got all those same names as lowercase and all those same names as uppercase. Now, one thing I want to mention while we're here is that if we click back into our formula tool, if you add additional formulas by clicking this little plus icon, Alteryx will do them in the order that they're listed. So if, for example, I wanted to add one more column, and I'll call this, just call it change back to title case for our demo here. Because my uppercase function comes before this one, I can actually use it here. So I can say title case and replace that with my uppercase name field that I just created above this. And if we run that, look at our results pane. We can see that that formula changed this uppercase name field back into title case. So it matches our original customer name field again. So it's just to demonstrate that you can use the fields that you create in a formula in subsequent formulas. Okay. So the last two string formulas I want to talk about are replace and replace character. So the replace function will just replace a piece of a string that you specify with a new piece that you specify. So there in the example on this slide, we've got the string, good judgment comes from experience. And if we specify that our target is experience, and we want to replace that word with the word awareness, then we'll return good judgment comes from awareness. Now replace character does the same thing, but just with a single character. So there in that first example, you can see that we have the string A, B, C, D, E, F, B. We've specified B as our target. So that's the thing that we want to replace. And then we've got an underscore. So that's what we want to replace it with. And then you can see it returns us that string with the B's replaced by underscores. You can also replace a list of characters. So there in that bottom example, we've got kind of some special characters in there, and we can list those special characters separated by commas as our target, and say we want to replace anything in that list with an underscore. And that will result in that underscore A, underscore B, underscore C. So again, if we just check back into Alteryx, and I'll just bring this to the front so we can see. And here, we've got the same data set. So customer name, order number, and department. And let's say where the department is sporting goods, we actually want it to say sporting equipment. So we'll grab a formula tool. And over in our configuration pane on the left, this time I'm not going to add a new column. I'm just going to modify an existing column. So here on this drop down, I'm going to select my department field. And I'm going to start typing replace. Oops. And there, again, it kind of auto-populates. It gives me a suggestion, so I'll just hit enter because it is that first one I want to use. The string I'm working on is my department field. My target is the word goods. And I want to replace it with the word equipment. And when I type these strings, they also need to be enclosed in either single or double quotation marks or speech marks. It doesn't matter whether it's single or double, as long as it's consistent within your formula. And we can see the preview little window here is showing clothing accessories. And that doesn't have the word goods or equipment in it, but it's showing us that because, again, it's just displaying our first record. So it looks the same before and after the formula is applied, just because none of the relevant words are in that cell. So again, we're just where we've got sporting goods, we want it to say sporting equipment. So we'll grab a browse tool, and just to make it easier to see our results, I'll run that. And then if we check our results pane, we can see that now in rows 2, 4, and 7, where it previously said sporting goods, it now says sporting equipment. So I can just click on the input versus the output of the formula tool, and you can see it change. Oops. There's the input, and there's the output. And just as one more example, let's say where my department says home and garden, where the and is indicated by an ampersand, maybe I want that ampersand to be a / instead. So I just want to replace a single character. Over in my formula tool configuration pane, I'll click the little plus to add a second formula. And again, in my select column dropdown, I'm just going to modify my existing department field. I'll start typing replace, and there I want that second one actually, the replace character in this case. So again, I'll replace that string parameter with my department field. My target is the ampersand. Again, needs to be in speech marks, quotation marks. And I want to replace it with a /. So if we run that, we can see that where it used to say home and garden with an ampersand, we've now got a / in its place because we just replaced that single character. Okay. So those are some of the string formulas I find most useful, that I find myself employing most often. But now let's move on to some DateTime formulas. There are quite a few of these because they're super, super useful. So I want to start by saying that Alteryx has a default date format that it needs dates to be in order to use them properly. That is year, 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 month, month, day, day, hour, hour, minute, minute, second, second. If a date is in any other format, when you bring it in, Alteryx is going to read it as a string. So in order to do any of the DateTime formulas, or to get it in the correct format, you need to convert it with either a DateTime parse function or a DateTime tool. So we're not going to cover the DateTime tool in this webinar, although it is a useful one. So we're going to look at the DateTime parse function instead. And again, this function just converts DateTime string data in an arbitrary format into the date format that Alteryx prefers and can use. So the DT parameter in this function just is the placeholder for your incoming DateTime string data. The F parameter is a placeholder for the format of the data that you're converting, expressed as a string in quotes. So what that means is, if we look at this example, we've got the year 2016, then / the day, then hyphen the month. So what we want to do is first list our date, which we've done there, and then separated by a comma, we put in the % symbol to stand in for all the numbers. So this bit, we're just trying to tell Alteryx what formula, or sorry, what format our incoming date is in. So we've got the % standing in for the numbers, then the year, then the /, then the % standing in for the numbers, a D to indicate that that bit is the day, followed by the hyphen, the % placeholder again, and then an M to indicate that that bit indicates the month. And once we do that with our DateTime parse function, it will return this nice clean 2016-03-28, which is in the correct format for Alteryx to use later. So I'm just going to go back into Alteryx. Move this a bit. So here I've got another little mini data set, and it's just a list of ordered dates. And we can see it's in kind of a wonky format. I've got the year, and then a period, then the day, then a forward slash, and then the month. So this is not in a format that Alteryx can read or use as a date. So it's actually a string field at the moment. And what we want to do is convert this with a DateTime parse function. So again, I'm going to grab a formula tool, connect it up to that input, back over my configuration pane. I'm going to, in my drop down here, I'm going to add a new column just so we can compare it to the original again. Column, and I'll just call this order date correct format. Oops, I've lost my mouse. Here we go. And I'm going to start typing my DateTime parse function. You can see there's quite a few DateTime functions available to us. Here it is. And again, we're going to replace that DT parameter with our existing order date field. That's the one we are intending to change. And then in this F, we're going to specify the format of our incoming data. So again, we want it to be within speech marks. And if we just go take a look at the format of our incoming data, again, we've got the year with a period, the day, forward slash, month. So click back onto our formula tool. And we'll put the % sign as a placeholder for the year, which comes first. Then we had a period. We'll do % as the placeholder for the days, in our case. We had a forward slash. And again, a % sign as a placeholder for the month. And close off the speech marks. We can see there in our preview pane that is going to give us what we want, the correct date format. And here's where I haven't mentioned this since that initial layout slide, but here's the data type of our output. And because I'm creating a new column, I can specify what data type I want the output of this formula to be. So I'm just going to scroll down and select date. Okay, so I'm just going to run that. Actually, I'll grab a browse tool again. Just make it easier to see. And then if we look at our results pane, here we've got our original order dates in the left column and our order dates in the correct format on the right. So you can see it's just converted each row into the default format that Alteryx can use. So that was the DateTime parse. We've also got DateTime start. So this one just returns the date and time when the current workflow started working. DateTime today, which just returns today's date. The time is set to midnight at the beginning of the day if you do have a time associated with your date. And we've also got the first of month and the last of month. So that those do what they say on the tin. So the DateTime first of month will give you the first day of the current month, and the DateTime last of month will give you the last day of the current month. And again, if you've got times associated with your dates, the first of month will give you midnight, and the last of month will give you 1 minute to midnight of the next day. So let's look at those in Alteryx as well. Just make some room here. So again, we've got another little miniature data set here. And here we've just got some order dates with some times associated with them. So this is a date time field instead of just a date. And we want to add new columns for when this workflow started running, for today's date, and for the first of the current month and the last of the current month. So again, I will just go grab a formula tool from my preparation tab, connect it to my input. Over in my configuration pane, again, I'm going to add new columns for each of these so that we can compare them to our original date time. So click my drop down, add column, and number 1 in my list of columns I want to create is when this workflow started running. We'll just call this workflow start. And here I'm going to use my DateTime start function. Again, I'll start typing. Got to type for a while because there's so many DateTime functions. There it is, DateTime start. And actually, you don't need to put anything in those brackets, in those parentheses, because it's not basing this off of any existing field that you've got. It's just returning the date and time that this current workflow started running. Again, on my output data type, I'm going to change that output to a date time. I'm going to grab a browse tool just so I can see my output easily. I'll run that. And if we check our results pane there, we can see that it has given us a new column called Workflow Start. And in every cell in that column, it's given us today's date and time. So that's because I've just run this workflow on the 26th of March at 2:34 and 36 seconds. So I'm going to click back onto that same formula tool. Over in my configuration pane, I'm going to click the little plus again to create another formula. My drop down, I'm going to add a column again. And I want this one, I just want to create a column with today's date in every row. Call this today's date. This is where I'm going to use my DateTime today function. Again, because this isn't referring to any existing field, it's just returning today's date. You don't need to put anything within those brackets or within those parentheses. And again, you can see in the preview window, it's going to give us the 26th of March, 2020, which is today's date in every row. And again, I'll just change the data type of my output field here to a date time. While I'm here, I'll go ahead and do the first day of the current month and the last day of the current month. So I'll hit my plus again. Once more, in this drop down, I'm going to add a new column. Call this this month. These aren't ideal naming conventions, but just for demonstration purposes. And I'll start typing date time. There it is, date time, first of month. Again, doesn't need anything inside those brackets. We can see in our preview pane, it's going to give us the 1st of March, and it's just going to give us midnight as the time. And I'll change the output type to a date time. And while I'm here, just quickly, I'm going to do the function for the last day of the current month as well. So again, I'll click this plus. My drop down, select add column, call this last day of this month. Now we use my DateTime last of month function. Again, no need to put anything in those brackets. Oops. And last thing, just change the output of this formula to a DateTime as well. So if I run that, check my results, zoom in for you. You can see there we've got our original order date and time, that column showing when this workflow started running. You can see it's now updated to 2:38 because that's the most recent time I've run it. And we've got this field of just today's date with midnight as the default time. First day of this month, so March the 1st, again at midnight. And the last day of this month, which is the 31st of March, 1 minute to midnight. Okay, it's got a few more date times to look at. These pull out just different parts of your date time. So you can pull out just the month, just the day, just the year, or hour, minute, second with these functions. So DateTime month, for example, will return just the number of the month within a date time. So there, in that example, we've got the 24th of March, 2017, along with the time. And if we use the DateTime month formula, it just returns 3. So just the month of March. We go back to Alteryx to look at these. Scroll down to my next example. Let's say we want to pull out the year, month, day, and hour of our order dates, put each of those in a new column. So again, let's look at this input. Here I've got an input of order dates and times. So again, we'll grab a formula tool, attach it to that input. Over in our configuration pane, again, I'm going to add new columns for each of these so that we can compare it to our original DateTime field. So again, in my dropdown, I'll add column. I'll just call this year. Here, I will use the DateTime year function. Here it is. The DateTime year. And here, I do need to replace that DT parameter with the field that I'm working on, which is my order date. Again, you can see in that data preview, it's pulling out just the year. So my first record is going to pull out just 2015. And last thing, I'm just going to change the data type of my output, again, to a DateTime. While I'm here, I'll go ahead and do the other date parts as well. So I'll just add a new formula, add a column. We'll skip month just for the sake of time. We'll just pull out the day. And in our expression editor, we'll start typing the DateTime day function. There it is. And you can see also if you hover over the formulas, it will tell you what they do. Again, replace that DT with our order date field. And again, just here, we'll change the data type of our output to a DateTime. And we'll add one more formula. So again, click this plus, add a new column, and we'll pull out the hour just to see what that looks like. Just start typing DateTime hour. And again, replace that DT with order date. And last thing, our output data type. Again, we'll change to a date time. So once more, I'm just going to add a browse tool so this is easy to see. Oops, I've got an error. Okay, so if we hover over a tool, it's got a little red exclamation point, we can see what the error is. Yes, so that's something important to mention. My error is telling me that the formula year resulted in a number, but the field is a date time. So if we go back to our formula, back to the configuration pane, it's going to output these date parts as integers. So actually, I want these outputs to just be integers. So on the data type of each of the outputs, I'm just going to select any integer, it doesn't matter, whether it's a 16 or 32. I'll run that one more time and see if that solved our problem. It did. Okay. So if we check our output here, we can see that our DateTime year function just pulled the year out of each of these order dates. The DateTime day did the same with just the day. And the hour pulled out just the hour from each of the times. And again, the reason we got that error message just a second ago was because the output of these DateTime part functions needs to be an integer. It will result in just an integer instead of a full date. Okay, and while I'm here, I just have a second example input just to look at what happens if we just got dates with no time information. What would happen if we tried to pull out the hour from this order date when it doesn't have a time associated with it? We'll grab a formula tool again. Over in my configuration pane, in my drop down, I'm going to add a new column, call it hour. In my expression editor, I'll start typing the DateTime hour function. Here it is. Replace that DT parameter with my order date field. And again, this output is going to need to be an integer as well. So change that data type output. I'll grab a a browse tool, excuse me. So I can look at my results. And here, we can see that when we tried to pull the hour out of this order date, it gives us 0 by default for every row because there's no time associated with it. It would have done the same if we'd asked to pull out the minutes or the seconds. It will give us 0 by default if there's no time associated with that date. Okay. Just a few more. There are quite a few DateTime formulas, but again, they're so handy. So the next one is the DateTime trim function, and this will remove unwanted portions of a DateTime. So for example, you could trim to just the beginning of the month or the end of the month. You could trim to midnight at the beginning of the year. You could trim to the month, to the day, to the hour, or to the minute. So one thing to note with this DateTime trim function is that it doesn't round up the value that it returns. So for example, you can see in this red text at the bottom, if you had 3:59:59 and trimmed it to the hour, it rolls it back to 3 o'clock, not 4 o'clock. So it rolls it back to the earlier hour. So let's just look at those briefly in Alteryx. Again, we've just got some order dates and times here as our input. And let's say we want to trim, ignore that add stuff. Let's say we want to trim those order dates to the first of the month, the last of the month, the year, the month, and the hour, each in a new column. Let's see what that would look like. So again, I will grab Formula Tool, attach it to that input. Over in my configuration pane, again, I'm going to add new columns here in this dropdown so that they're easy to compare to the original. Say, call this one trim first of the month. And I'll start typing my DateTime trim function in the expression editor. There it is. And again, I'll replace that DT with my order date field. And that T is the placeholder for what I want to trim it to. So again, I need some speech marks. Tell it I want to trim to the first of the month. And again, we can see in our data preview window, that's what our first record is going to look like once this formula is applied. I will change its output to a date time, I think. Okay. So I'm just going to click my little plus again to add another formula. I'll skip last of month, again, for the sake of time. Let's say I'll add a column, call this trim year, and I'll start typing my DateTime trim function again, replace that DT with my order date, and that I, if we go back to our slides for a moment, oops, it's not on my slide actually. Forget that. It's because I've accidentally selected the wrong function. So I've accidentally selected a DateTime add function. So that's easy to do if you're just selecting from the menu that pops up automatically. So I'll get rid of that. And what I meant to grab, there we go, is my DateTime trim function. That's why that was throwing me off. But again, a good example of how easy it is to grab the wrong one. So again, I'll replace that DT with my order date. Replace that T with what I want to trim it to. So I want to trim it to the year in this case. And again, I'll change that output to a date time. And I'll skip the others. Just grab a browse and see how these look. I'll run that. If I look at my output, there's my original order date. And you can see when I trim to the first of the month, it's trimmed it from January 29th, 2015 to January 1st, 2015 in that first row. Actually, all of these are January, so it's trimming to January 1st for each of them. But if there were other months, it would trim to the first date of any of those months. Next up, we've got that same order date trimmed to the year. So again, it will automatically back up to the first of the year, 2015 in that first row, 2017 in the second row, and so on. Okay, just two more date times. I know we're short on time here. Just show you real quick the DateTime add function. So this modifies a given date time with a specified duration. So you can add a certain number of days or months or minutes or seconds or anything like that onto an existing date time. One thing to keep in mind is that any fraction in the specified duration is truncated. So you can't actually add 1.5 hours, for example. That would truncate it to just add 1 hour. Instead, you would want to add 90 minutes. Also, adding a unit doesn't change the value of the smaller units. So for example, adding hours would not change the value of your existing minutes and seconds. So we'll just check that one out Back in Alteryx. Again, our input is just some order dates and times. And let's say we wanted to add a day to the order date. That's the first thing we want to do. Grab a formula tool. Over in my configuration pane, I'm going to add a new column. I'll just call this order date +1. Start typing my DateTime add function. Replace that DT with my order date. And here we've got the I and the U parameters. So if we just check our slides again, we can see that the I stands in for the integer of time that you want to add or subtract. It can be positive or negative, so you can add it or take it away. And the U is the unit, again, between quotation marks or speech marks. So back in Alteryx, if we wanted to add one day to our order date, we'd replace that I with a 1, and we'd replace that U with our units for days. Again, I'll just change that output to a date time. And you can also add time to today's date, for instance. And I'll create a new formula, a new column. Let's call this one today +2 days. We should specify, I suppose. Then I'll start typing my DateTime add function. Replace my DT with order date. Integer I want to add is 2. And the units, again, is days. And I'll change the output data type, again, to a date time. And I'll add one more just to look at what happens if you're adding time instead of days. Add a new formula, add a new column, and call this order date plus an hour and a half. Again, I'll start typing my DateTime add function. Place the DT with my order date. Oops. And the integer I want to add, again, I'm not going to put 1.5 because it would truncate that. So instead, I'm going to say 90 in minutes as my unit. Oops. Again, I'll just specify that I want that output to be a date time. So grab a browse tool, run that. If we look at our results, we'll just look at this first row, for instance. We've got January 29th of 2015. So when we just added one day onto our order date, gives us January 30th, 2015. And when we created a new column for today's date plus 2 days, we get 31st of January 2015. That's actually adding 2 days onto the order date and not today's date. I'm sorry, I'll fix that in just a second. But anyway, in our last column, we have just added an hour and a half to that order date. So where the original was the 29th of January 2015 at 12:29, when we add 90 minutes, we've got the 29th of January 2015 at 1:59 p.m. So just added 90 minutes onto that. And the reason this today plus 2 days went wrong is if I go back to my formula tool, you can see when you go back to these, if you've got multiple formulas happening in a single tool, they'll collapse. So if you just click this little arrow on the left, it will expand your subsequent formulas. And the reason this went wrong is I don't want to add 2 days onto the order date here. I actually want to add it onto today's date. So I'll actually throw in my date time today. Just like that. And again, nothing in the brackets. If we run that, hopefully we'll get the 28th of March. There we go, that did it. So we've got the 28th of March, 2020, because we're adding 2 days onto today's date for every row. I'm just gonna pause for a second and check the chat, because I know we've covered a lot. Okay, all good? And because I know we're really short on time, I'm just gonna show you actually the finished examples of the last date time formula we wanted to look at, which is the date time diff. And this will just give you the difference between two dates. So you've got DT1 indicating your first date, DT2 indicating your second date, and U specifying the units. And again, the duration that it returns to you is a number or an integer. So again, we'll just look at my finished example here. And here, I've got a column for date A and date B. And if I wanted to find the difference between these two dates, I go look at the formula that I used a DateTime diff function, and I want to know the difference between date A and date B given to me in days. So there's where I specified my units in speech marks. And then in this second formula, I did the same thing, but I want to know the difference in months. And again, my output is a double because it's going to be a number rather than a date time. Check my results. You can see what that did. Here it gave me the difference between date A and date B. In my first row, it's 305 days or 10 months. So that's what the date time diff does. And we've actually run out of time to look at my conditional formulas, but we can always get to those in another webinar. But I appreciate you joining in. Hopefully this was helpful. We run a lot of webinars at the Information Lab. There are several coming up in the coming weeks, especially with everyone working remotely. So if you want to see which ones are coming up, just check out meetup.com/lets-talk-data. And also, if you want to get in touch with me, my name again is Sarah Jellenc. I'll just show you my email and Twitter again. There you go. There are my contact details if you want to reach out to me. And we hope to see you in a future webinar. Thanks again.